Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. On the dedication page of Swami Kriyananda's book, The Path, appears the following account. A group of Yogananda's disciples had gone with him to see a movie about the life of Gyandev, a great saint of medieval India. Afterwards, they gathered and listened to the master explain certain subtler aspects of that inspiring story. A young man in the group mentioned another film he had seen years earlier in India about the life of Mirabai, a famous woman saint. If you had seen that movie, he exclaimed, you wouldn't even have liked this one. The guru rebuked him. Why make such comparisons? The lives of great saints manifest in various ways the same one God. The Bible contains a similar account in the Gospel of St. Luke. And John said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and we forbade him, because he followeth not with us. And Jesus said unto him, Forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us. The more central a truth, the greater the number of contexts in which it can be applied. Truth is like a pure white light, containing within itself the full spectrum of the rainbow. Let no one tell you what your path to God ought to be. Many are the paths. Select your own according to the dictates of your own nature, no matter how out of step that puts you with other people. Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, trying even unsuccessfully to fulfill one's own spiritual duty or dharma is better than pursuing successfully the duties of others. Better death itself in the pursuance of one's own duties. The pursuance of another's duties is fraught with spiritual danger. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Some years ago, Dharmadas and I and some of the choir members went to participate in an interfaith program. So people from Christian churches and Catholics and Sikhs and Hindus and Sufis and us all came together, and basically we shared our music, which was sort of universally appealing. It was a very, very sweet program. And I remember we were particularly attracted to the Sufis, and we went to introduce ourselves to the main couple there that had been leading their part of the program. And we just stood together, the four of us, for the longest time, just connecting and talking, making small talk really. But what drew us was a similar vibration. The four of us had a similar vibration. And we just loved them. And we could tell they loved us. It was very, very sweet. And a friend was telling me a quote by Vivekananda a few days ago, and he said that Vivekananda said, all religions are like the spokes of a wheel. They all come together in the center. And it's so true. That's what I felt with that Sufi couple, that they were following their own path, just like we were, but we're going to get to the same place. Similar vibration. That's how in the autobiography of a yogi you hear the story of Yogananda meeting St. Teresa Neumann, who had the stigmata. She was a Catholic saint. And the people who were surrounding her were sort of protecting her from visitors. But when she heard Yogananda come in, she said, "I will see the man of God from India." Because they had that same energy, that same love for God. Swami Kriyananda has taught us that we need to be loyal to our own path, because if you're too eclectic, you sort of lose focus. And it's important to stay loyal to what God has given you as your own particular way to find God. But that loyalty should never become narrow-minded. It should always be ever expansive, including everyone as children of God. So of course, we love everyone with that same love. There's another sweet story in the autobiography of a yogi where Yogananda is passing a street corner and he stops to listen to a group of people chanting. And they're very raucous and off-key and sounding a little bit drunk. And he sort of is mentally criticizing how raucous and rowdy they are singing the Lord's name. And just then, one of his teachers comes hurrying towards him. He just manifested himself, actually. And he's hurrying towards Yogananda, links his arm through his, and they walk on. And he says to Yogananda, "Doesn't the Lord's name sound sweet from both ignorant and wise lips?" The Lord's name sounds sweet. If people love God, what else is there? I think that's what we felt with this Sufi couple. Whatever they were doing, it was working. There was love there. And each of us has to find that particular, unique way of connecting back with the divine. I've been reading Joseph Selby's book, Break Through the Limits of the Brain, and I really recommend this book, as all of his spiritual name is Purushottama. All of Purushottama's books are wonderful. Physics of God, the book on the Yuga cycles of time, this book, and he also wrote a science fiction series, a spiritual science fiction series, which I think is one of my favorite books of all time. It's just fabulous. It's called the Protector series. But I'm going to just share two little stories that he tells in the first part of this book. So, Charlene Hoffmeyer, 19 years old and home with her family for Thanksgiving in 2017, heard a loud crash and a shout coming from the family garage. She found her father trapped under his GMC pickup truck, from which flames were rising. Charlotte still can't fully explain what happened next. She says, "I lifted up the truck the first time and my dad said, 'Okay, you almost got it.' And I finally managed to lift it up again and put it back on the jack." It had fallen off the jack. She put it back on the jack. It was some crazy strength, and then I pulled out my dad. And another story, this was a woman in her kitchen fixing a meal for her family when suddenly The garden and the kitchen were filled with golden light. I became conscious that at the center of the universe and in my garden was a great pulsing dynamo that ceaselessly poured out love. This love poured over me and through me, and I was part of it, and it wholly encompassed me. It was overwhelmingly real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. Each of us is unique. Each of us draws unique experiences that draw us onto the path or deeper into the path, whatever it is. I'll share not quite as dramatic an experience, but one that I had when we at Ananda took a tour of the Holy Land, a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And Swami had been there a couple of years earlier, and in each of the holy places that he visited, he wrote music. So there were a dozen or so beautiful choir pieces. This was the oratorio that we often sing here at Ananda. And so I was the choir director for this pilgrimage. And Swami's idea had been that everyone who was going on the pilgrimage should be in the choir, which is a lovely sentiment. But there were some bad boys in the tenors and basses. And some of them had never sung before or since. And they were reading the music like, which way does this go? And so they were pretty rowdy in all the rehearsals. You know, they didn't know how to read music, so they were insecure, and they made up for it with bluster and disruption. So it was the hardest choir I have ever worked with. So we got to the Holy Land, and I had this little Casio that was about this big, and I really depended on that to get these bad boys to sing the right note, because I would just pound their note until they got it for their starting note. So this one time we were in a big bus, and the bus parked, and we were walking for quite some ways, and I had been sitting in the back of the bus. The people in the front of the bus knew what was happening a lot better than we did. So I thought, all of us in the back thought we were stopping for lunch. Well, we were, but we were going to visit the Church of the Nativity first. We were in Bethlehem. So I got all the way into the church, and they said, okay, we're going to sing. And it was like, oh, I don't have my little Casio. So Ram, you remember Ram, who came and gave a concert a couple weeks ago? He was my friend, and he and I, of course, he used to play for the 49ers, so he was in pretty good shape. I, on the other hand, was not in as good a shape, but we ran. I don't know how long. It seems like it was a very long, long way. And we got to the bus, and the bus driver wasn't there. So it was locked. And so Ram boosted me up, and I went in through the driver's side window. We were a good team, actually. I was small enough, and he was big. So I got in through the window, quickly found my stuff. We got out and ran all the way back. Well, as you can imagine, this does something to your heart rate. And so when I got into the church and sat down, the sudden stillness must have triggered the endorphins or something. And I had this amazing experience, which is hard to describe, but the best I can do to describe it is that I was a little drop of light, shining, iridescent, colorful, sparkling light. And my entire mission was to get back to that great light. And I could see this light in my forehead that was just magnificent, just all loving, all blissful light. And that's really all there was. The little drop of light longing and moving towards that great light. So, for each of us, we have that opportunity to express the unique, beautiful life that we have that's dedicated, all of us, to returning to that great light. And let's have confidence in that unique path and give it our hearts. And then we will merge back into that light.
Nirmala talking about the heart and the sort of universality of that reminded me of a little cartoon that I saw once where a man was coming to his therapist or spiritual teacher, and the caption underneath says, it's her talking to him, and she's saying, "We're going to work on opening up your heart chakra." And he sees that she has a sledgehammer and a chisel. We're going to beat it out of you. And sometimes I think that's what it takes, is a sledgehammer and a chisel to loosen this thing up. I'm reminded of a story. This is my own story, and it's not nearly as colorful as what Nirmala told, but it's a little bit of that same process with the sledgehammer and the chisel. So this is circa 2000 or 2001, and we had been performing Swamiji's play, The Peace Treaty, roughly yearly and sometimes more than once a year, starting in 98 or 99. So that, we had done this several times, enough to feel like we were starting to get in the flow of it. Well, I had the lead part in this play, and my character has a lot of lines, a boatload of lines. I timed it out because I recorded it all so that I could just play it back and memorize it that way. It was 45 minutes of lines. Anyway, but I knew them. I did memorize it. I got to be fairly good at it. Well, one rehearsal, Swamiji attended the rehearsal. And so the whole cast is there. We're working on some scenes, getting the blocking right. And well, then he has everybody sit down except me. And he starts, because I have these long monologues in the thing. So he starts working on me. And he's got me repeating lines over and over and over. And he reefed down on me so hard. At one point, this was fascinating to me because, the heat, it gets really warm when Swami's got the high beams on you and you're like it, and he's not happy with how it's going. Never mind that, you know the line, you can more or less say it correctly, not good enough. Not good enough, not good enough. And at one point, he would stop me mid-line, and I would rewind and try to say it again, and he'd suggest something. No, and it was no, just, and he started stopping me so fast that I couldn't even get a word out. And I said, Swami, give me a chance. At least. Now 20 odd years later, I can look back on that and I can say he was right. He was right to stop me before the first word came out because he knew it wasn't going to go in the right direction. Now, how the heck could he have known that? He could feel it. He just simply could feel that he's trying to correct me, but the groove that I was in was too deep. My little tires were in the ruts and they weren't going to go left or right because the little grooves were really deep, and it was like, no, I'm going that way. Well, sometimes it takes a sledgehammer and a chisel to get you out of the groove to a different place. Now, he could do that with me. I can't say that I was thrilled. I can't say that I necessarily enjoyed it, and I can say that I went to the next rehearsal with a certain trepidation that we were going to do this all over again, which we didn't. It's on film somewhere too. I mean, God knows if it ever will see the light of day again, but let's say it was memorable. And went for a half an hour he did this. Just me and him. I think that scared the living criminy out of the rest of the cast. I mean, just anyway. But his point was not harm. And there was no harm, except maybe a little bit to my ego. But that's no harm, because his point was lift the energy. Listen to what I'm saying so that I can guide what you're doing in a better way at a higher level. And some of what he was saying was frankly impossible to do, or it certainly wasn't possible from the level of energy that I was at. He wanted me to dramatize. I'm rolling along with this monologue about the law and how laws for centuries have been written, but they have forever been impotent to influence people who don't want to follow them. And, he wanted me to do some gesture around the word impotent, and it was like, what? I don't know how to do that. And anyway, but he was challenging me to rise, and that's what life does. That's what the Guru does for all of us, to the degree that we are willing. If you show up at the fountain of youth, or the fountain of bliss, or the fountain of light that Nirmala was talking about, if you show up with a thimble or a Dixie cup, you get that much. And you get to lovingly carry away your precious thimble full of whatever. And if you show up with a bushel basket or a pickup truck or an ocean liner, an oil tanker or something, then, you get more of it. But each one of us gets that choice for ourselves. And I love in this reading, Swamiji says, flat out, let no one tell you what your path to God ought to be. I mean, that's profound. There's a line in his beautiful song, What is Love? Or a whole stanza, actually, but it starts with, not a church. He's talking about God. God is dead, so men say. Can't they see all life's his play? Not a church binds him as its own. Not a creed makes him fully known. Foolish we if we limit him. Every atom is his throne. And, you think, if every atom is the throne of God, every atom, Swami used to say this in lectures, every atom is dowered with individuality. It's every person, every atom has its own path to God. And yet, there is this universality to it also. This is the strange contradiction. This is why Nirmala could talk about that Sufi couple, and we could see, I'll just add a little sidelight to that. Whatever they were doing, it had to be working. Because you could not buy the look that was on their faces for money or for anything else. You had to earn that look. That look says, whatever I do it every day. And I do it with my heart. Whatever it is, I don't even know what it was. We have no idea. I mean, their music was beautiful, and we loved that. So obviously it must have had something to do with music somewhere along the way. But that universality says, lift your awareness from the material, the lower side, which tells us, no, we're just the body, we're just the this, we're just the self-definitions that we've lovingly created over incarnations and nothing more, nothing beyond. I read a story recently that was so sweet in this regard. This young woman had a near-death experience, and she was in a coma for 10 days or more. And during that time, she said, basically it was kind of a loop, like a recording that was stuck on repeat. Basically, she was around her grandmother and she was around this presence of light and love, and she really wanted to stay there. But the message from the grandmother was, your mother needs you and it's not your time. Choose life. And so, she ultimately came back to life, even though she wanted to stay where she was, and chose to be in life, even though it was difficult and challenging. And some months later, or some while later, she goes into some loud, boisterous group of people and runs into somebody that she's never met before. And this lady takes one look at her and says, the only reason you're here is because your grandmother gave you a kick in the rear end to get back. And she had never told the story to anyone except her mother, and she had never met this person ever before. It turned out that the lady was psychic, obviously. She had some connection to these things. But it's just fascinating to realize that there is this larger picture of which we are a part, and our way of following that one path. Swami had Nirmala create a new cover for his book, The Path. This was after 20-odd years of one kind of design, and he wanted a different one. And he had created a painting of the spiritual eye, and you see this devotee looking up at the spiritual eye with arms upraised like this. And so she created a beautiful cover like that. Well, he also changed the subtitle of the book. This was in about 1997 or 8, somewhere there. And the title had been The Path, Autobiography of a Western Yogi. And I remember that subtitle very clearly because I was like, whoa. I didn't know much of anything about the path at the time that I got the book, but Autobiography of a Western Yogi intrigued the heck out of me because I was like, whoa, there is such a thing as a Western Yogi. Well, let's find out about that. So I bought the book. Well, anyway, in the late 90s, he changed that subtitle, and the subtitle became One Man's Quest on the Only Path There Is. And you could think, and I'm juxtaposing this against the reading today, the paths are many. You could say, well, wait a minute, how can the paths be many and there's only one and this is his quest on it? It's because the path is to get to the center of the wheel, like Nirmala was describing. Which spoke you're riding on isn't the point. The point is where you're going toward the center. And your own way of getting to that point has universal qualities. It means lift your awareness. You know, you'll see, yesterday I caught a highlight of a play that happened in football, a college football game. And somebody had done something that didn't make the coach happy. And I don't even remember what it was, if it was a stupid penalty or if it was just a bad play, whatever. And I remember seeing the coach, and the coach was on his knees, and he was pounding the ground with his hand. And I was like, you know, the energy doesn't go down any further than the ground. You know, it's like there aren't toe chakras, but he was trying to exercise. He was trying to find one if he could find one. And you'll see that with little kids when they're really upset. They start stamping. It's like, just get down lower. It's like the energy doesn't go any further down. Well, obviously we're trying to go up higher above that level. And that part is the universal part. How we do that, which practices we use to achieve that, that's individual. But the universality of it is that it has to rise up. Because it's going to do it sooner or later anyway. It's just that we have the choice. How long do we want to suffer in delusion? And how soon are we sick and tired of suffering in delusion and we want to get to where there isn't suffering? That's the part that's up to us. And think of all of the lessons that life gives us and the pain and agony. I've been working with a hand therapist. Those of you who have ears could probably tell that I was struggling with the guitar this morning. I feel like I've got concrete for fingers right now. But this guy, after a couple of weeks of working with me, I came in and, you know, you could start to see that I have a wrist again instead of what he described as an inflamed mass of agony. And we have all been, at one time or another, an inflamed mass of agony. And we don't really want to go there anymore. It's like time to move above that level. And that part of the path is universal. But how we walk it is entirely up to us. Let's find that deep inward connection and stay open as Nirmala stayed open in that experience in the Holy Land. Racing back to the bus, racing back to the sanctuary to have a deep experience. Often it comes very unexpectedly. Let's stay open to that unexpectedness, because that's often how the divine comes to us.